Hello and welcome to another episode of Boring History. Today we're going to be looking at the story of the Kobold Hinzelmann. Now, as with all stories, there are many different versions, and the one that I've used, I've put the name below. It is in German, so I'm not sure how useful it's going to be, but I'm sure a quick Google search you'll be able to find something that you can read in your own language. Now, the thing with this story is that it kind of starts off super happy, kind of alright and nice and nothing much. Then suddenly it goes really dark, just for a moment, and then it goes back to being happy. But anyway, let's get started. It was during the year 1584 that a type of poltergeist known as a kobold first began making its presence known at the castle Hudemühlen. It started with just a few thumps and bumps in the night, but it wasn't long before the kobold started having conversations with first the servants, then the lord and lady of the castle, and eventually it extended the pleasure of its conversation even to visiting guests. Now, as you'd imagine, people were initially pretty freaked out by this. I mean, imagine you're just strolling down the corridors of your castle when this invisible voice is suddenly like, hey, it may be raining today, maybe bring an umbrella. Also, the roses in the garden are looking amazing. Make sure to tell the gardener he's done a great job. But anyway, the voice was friendly, sounded a lot like a child, and said a lot of nice things. And so people just kind of put up with it. And eventually they began asking it questions. Things like, who are you? What are you? What's your name? And thus, they found out that his name was Hinzelmann. He had a wife, but they were currently separated, and he came from the Bohemian mountains, but the people there didn't like him very much, so he was like, screw you guys, I'm out. Hinzelmann promised that eventually he would show himself, but the timing wasn't quite right yet. But he reassured everyone that he really was a very respectable house guest and that they should all just carry on as they were. Now, the lord and lady and the servants of the castle, they weren't really sure that they were okay with these long-term residency plans that this invisible house guest seemed to have. So they were like, we need a change of scenery, let's go to Hanover. When they arrived in Hanover, everybody settled in and things seemed to be going well. But then one night, the lord of the castle realized that his necklace was missing. Now, everybody searched high and low, but they couldn't find the necklace anywhere. And eventually, admitting defeat, the lord returned to his room and dejectedly sat on his bed. It really was his favorite necklace. Suddenly, a voice next to him asked, "Why are you sad? Is it because of the missing necklace?" The lord looked up. He's like, "Hinzelmann, is that you? What are you doing here? Where's my necklace? Did you take it?" Hinzelmann replied, "Didn't you see those white horses that ran alongside the carriage as you came here? That was me. Also, in regards to your necklace, you yourself put it under those pillows over there, so maybe you should try looking under there." Now, the lord was happy that he found his necklace. He was less happy about the fact that they couldn't seem to escape Hinzelmann. But considering that the kobold seemed to be following them around, he was like, you know what, we may as well just return home and see how it goes. Once they returned home, life continued as normal, and Hinzelmann made himself useful. He helped with the dishes, with the cleaning, and even the gardening. He really liked roses. And he got himself a little room in a forgotten area of the castle where he had a little bed and a little table and a little stool. Now, nobody had yet seen Hinzelmann, but they knew he slept in the bed because every morning there was a small indent, much like a cat would make when it sleeps on your bed. And he was also rather fond of freshly baked bread rolls and sweet milk, which the servants would hear him lapping up. Again, much like a cat would. Now, Hinzelmann had another useful talent. He could warn people when there was upcoming danger, a skill which was made apparent when the lord was visited by an old hunting buddy named Thomas. Now, Hinzelmann warned them and said, "Thomas, don't go hunting because you're definitely going to meet with an accident." But of course, Thomas didn't listen and they went out. Now, just as he was lining up the perfect shot, his thumb slipped, the gun dropped, everything was a complete disaster. Actually, I think maybe he shot his thumb, he broke his thumb, I don't know, something happened with his thumb. Now, the other thing that Hinzelmann wasn't really a fan of is if you weren't very nice to him. So, for example, there was this maid and she had the audacity to scold him, and what he did is he locked her in the cellar, left her there all night, and when she came out she was almost scared to death. Nobody knew why, but kind of been a good thing that happened down there. Now, after all these various incidences, the lord was like, Hinzelmann, I need to see you. You're spending so much time in my castle, doing so much around here. I just need to know that you exist in this world. Now, at first, Hinzelmann refused, but after much pleading, he eventually gave in. And he took the Lord's hand and he said, "Look, here I am." Now, the Lord couldn't be sure because he couldn't see anything, but it felt to him as if he were holding the hand of a small child. He groped around in the air and eventually his hand came to rest on a small head. And again, he couldn't be sure, but it felt to him as if he were touching the actual bone of the skull. But before he could be certain, the head withdrew and Hinzelmann retreated. Now, even the cook was getting restless at this stage. She was like, "Hinzelmann, you're spending so much time in my kitchen. I really need to know who or what you are." Again, Hinzelmann refused, saying that the timing wasn't quite right and that if she ended up getting her wish, she was going to regret it. But the cook continued to insist and eventually Hinzelmann gave in. And he instructed her as follows. "Tomorrow, before dawn, take 2 buckets of water, carry them in each hand and head down to the cellar." Now, the cook, of course, thought that this was a very odd request. But then again, considering that they'd been talking to an invisible voice for all this time, she was like, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." The next day, before dawn, she entered the cellar carrying 2 buckets of water. At first, she couldn't see anything, but as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she looked towards the corner. And there she saw the dead, naked body of a child of around 3 years old. In his heart were 2 knives stabbed one after the other, and his whole body was covered in blood. The cook screamed and promptly fainted. Hinzelmann took the buckets of water and poured the remaining contents over her head. As she came to, he said, "You see, if you didn't have the water, you would have died because nothing could have revived you." And it's for this reason that Hinzelmann didn't show his true form to adults, because it was just so terrible that they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Instead, he liked to describe himself as a small, joyful child with golden curly hair. And in fact, he preferred the company of children as they didn't really judge. But whenever an adult saw his true form, he decided that it was time to go. And so, after spending 4 long years at the castle, Hinzelmann decided to freely leave. Before he left, he instructed the lord of the castle to gather 3 items. A small cross the size of a finger covered in silk, a rather elaborately plaited straw hat, and a leather glove that was embroidered with pearls. He told the lord that so long as these 3 items were kept safe and together, his house would flourish and prosper. But if even one of these items were misplaced or damaged, the exact opposite would happen. The lord and his generations that preceded him took this advice, and the house prospered. And as for Hinzelmann, in 1588 he left the castle and settled in Eichstätt. The end. That's basically it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.